Agent Daniel Reeve couldn't shake it. The message fragment alive. Trustno was a ghost haunting the silence of his office. He'd spent the night staring at the file, the official story of the Alcatraz escape, feeling thinner than the paper it was printed on. 3 men, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, supposedly swallowed by the freezing black waters of the San Francisco Bay. The official report said they drowned, their makeshift raft torn apart by the currents. But Reeve, a man who trusted evidence over headlines, knew the ocean usually gives back its dead. And in this case, the ocean had given back nothing. No bodies, no definitive wreckage, just a chilling, echoing silence. As dawn broke over the city, its light barely piercing the thick fog rolling in from the bay, Reeve knew this was more than just a case of 3 convicts who got lucky. It was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. The official narrative was a neat little box, but the loose ends were spilling out everywhere. Footprints were found on Angel Island, leading away from the water, not into it. There were rumors of a car stolen that night, a blue Chevrolet, and then there was that cryptic message, a warning that felt aimed directly at him. Someone knew he was looking, someone wanted him to stop. By the time he got back to his desk, the case had metastasized. It was no longer a manhunt for escaped prisoners. It had become a hunt for the truth, and Reeve was starting to suspect that the real walls weren't on Alcatraz, but within the very institutions he served. He filed a standard request for the internal prison communications from the night of the escape. A simple, procedural step, the denial came back in under 5 minutes. Not just denied, but stamped with a level of authority that made the hair on his arms stand up. It didn't come from the warden of Alcatraz. It came from Washington. That was a different kind of monster. A denial that fast, that final, wasn't bureaucracy. It was a slammed door, a warning. Reeve knew pushing through official channels was now a dead end. So, he went sideways. He slipped out of the office and headed for the docks, the air thick with the smell of salt and diesel. He needed someone who heard things the official reports never recorded. He found his man, an old informant named Sal, huddled in the back of a dimly lit bar, his eyes constantly scanning the fog-shrouded piers. Sal was reluctant, his gaze flickering nervously toward the door. The name Alcatraz made people clammy. "They'll cut my throat for talking to you," Sal mumbled, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Reeve slid a few bills across the sticky table. Sal's hand covered them like a trap. All right. I heard something," he finally conceded, leaning in closer. "A friend of a friend works the early morning fish market. He saw something that night, something weird." Sal took a swig of his drink. "He saw 3 men come ashore. Looked like drowned rats, half frozen and shaking, but they were walking away from the water like they had somewhere to be." Reeve's pulse quickened. Did anyone see where they went? Sal shook his head slowly. "That's the weird part. My guy said a truck was waiting, a military truck. No plates, no markings. It pulled up, the 3 guys got in, and it was gone. Vanished into the fog, a military truck. That wasn't how fugitives on the run operated. Fugitives stole cars, they hid in shadows, they didn't get a chauffeured ride from an unmarked government vehicle. This wasn't an escape, it was starting to feel like an extraction. Every new piece of information was pulling Reeve further down a rabbit hole he was unsure he could climb out of. While he was chasing shadows on the San Francisco docks, a different kind of pressure was being applied hundreds of miles away. To clean-cut federal agents paid a visit to the Anglin family home in rural Florida. Their official reason was a routine follow-up interview, a standard part of any major fugitive investigation. But the tone wasn't standard, it was cold. The Anglin brothers' mother, a woman worn down by years of worrying, was subjected to another round of questioning. When she finally asked, her voice trembling with frustration, why they were putting her through this again, one of the agents gave her a thin, unnerving smile. "Ma'am," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "we're just here to ensure your family's safety." It wasn't a reassurance. It was a threat veiled in the language of concern. A message was being sent. Stay quiet. Don't talk to the press. Don't ask questions for your own safety. Back on the West Coast, Reeve was digging into the prison personnel files, looking for any anomaly, any name that didn't fit. He found one, a maintenance worker named Ellis Harper. Military background, impeccable service record, an expert in electrical systems. Harper had clocked out unusually late on the night of the escape. 2 days later, he was gone. His file showed an approved transfer, expedited for an overseas assignment. It was too neat to clean. Reeve tried to track him down, but Harper had vanished. His forwarding address was a P.O. box that led nowhere. It was another dead end, another piece of the puzzle deliberately removed from the board. The walls were closing in, not on the fugitives, but on Reeve's investigation. Witnesses who had initially been eager to talk suddenly clammed up, their memories growing foggy. A guard who had reported seeing a boat in the bay that night recanted his statement, claiming he was mistaken. Another guard, who had been vocal about lax security protocols, ended up in the hospital after a workplace accident that left him with a broken leg and a newfound desire for silence. This wasn't a cover-up born of negligence. This was organized. This was containment. Frustrated, Reeve pulled every string he had left, calling in a favor from an old contact in naval intelligence. He asked for anything, any classified reports related to Alcatraz that weren't in the public domain. A week later, a plain manila envelope with no return address landed on his desk. Inside was a single, heavily redacted document. But what wasn't blacked out was enough to make Reeve's blood run cold. The report detailed a secret program. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison for gangsters and bank robbers. It had also been used to quietly house certain inmates with specialized skills, particularly those with intelligence or military backgrounds. And there, on the list of assets, was a name Reeve knew all too well, Frank Morris. The report hinted that Morris, a man with a genius-level IQ, wasn't just a common criminal. He was an asset who knew things, dangerous things. Suddenly, the escape wasn't about breaking out. It was about getting him out. It wasn't an act of defiance against the system. It was an operation run by a hidden part of it. The escape wasn't chaos. It was leverage. The government hadn't lost a prisoner. They had moved a chess piece. 3 weeks after the escape, a postcard arrived at the FBI field office in San Francisco. It was addressed to the lead investigator of the Alcatraz case, a man who had publicly and repeatedly declared Morris and the Anglins dead. On the front was a simple, hand-drawn picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. On the back, just 5 words were scrawled in neat block letters. "We kept our end." Below the words was a small, cryptic symbol. Reeve recognized it instantly. It was an unofficial marker used in certain black ops circles for a successful extraction. Someone was sending a message, a confirmation. The postcard was the final piece. Reeve sat in his office, the scattered evidence painting a picture of a conspiracy so vast it was almost unbelievable. He now knew the men who supposedly drowned in the bay were alive. He knew their escape was a staged event. And he knew that the people behind it were powerful enough to silence witnesses, alter records, and make federal agents disappear. As the city lights began to twinkle outside his window, the door to his office opened. 2 men in identical dark suits stood in the doorway, their faces devoid of expression. "Agent Reeve," one of them said, his voice flat. "You're being reassigned, effective immediately." The overhead lights flickered, casting the room in a brief, stuttering darkness. And in that moment, Daniel Reeve understood everything. He hadn't been chasing ghosts. The ghosts had been watching him. The men who escaped Alcatraz were never meant to be found because they were never truly lost. They were alive, and someone very powerful was still protecting them. The conspiracy doesn't end here. To find out what happened to Agent Reeve and where the trail leads next, make sure you're subscribed to my channel. We're going to follow this case to the very end, no matter how deep it goes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.